Hey guys, welcome back to the series. And today we're going to create our own interface and use that to damage enemies, so we can use it in the future to damage some buildings or damage some other stuff. Anything that we want to blow up or destroy. So stick around, find out how we do it, and I hope this helps you guys. All right, guys, so if you remember from our last script, right, we had this text field and these buttons so that we could use the iDrag handler interface and be able to move left and right on our screen, up and down. Then we could use the buttons to adjust our speed and figure out what we wanted. So let's go ahead and move on from there. And since we don't need those anymore, we're just going to delete that text element and delete those button elements. And let's go back into the iDrag handler script, which is on our input handler. Or correction, let's go back to our input handler script and let's get rid of all the stuff that we had for debugging. So we'll remove this text. We don't need the start anymore. So we can just delete all of that. And we don't need to adjust the buttons anymore as well. Delete all of that and save. Let everything compile. All right, guys, so next we're going to do our first interface. And if you're not familiar with interfaces, I suggest you go and check out the video I linked in the description. It's from the guys at Infallible Code. It's called Using Interfaces in Game Development. Great video. It's helped me out a couple of times. So, all right, so we're going to go into our scripts folder. Going to create a C# script. Now, interfaces, the common way is to start with an I so that you can easily identify as an interface, and then give the description of what it's going to do. So this is going to be able to damage either the enemy or other buildings or ground or terrain, anything that we want to damage. So we're just going to call it iDamageable. Let that process, and we'll open that up in Unity. So typically you wouldn't need any of these using statements, but we're going to keep the using Unity engine, and we'll get to that in just a second. We'll delete everything else and start out as a public interface, iDamageable. And we're going to have one method that we're going to implement with this interface. It's going to be a public void damage taken. So we're going to take two parameters on this method. The first one is going to be a float. That's just going to be the amount of damage. And the next one, since we're going to have some sort of particle effect every time that we hit something, we want to get a little bit of information, and we're going to use raycasting for those particle effects. So we're going to have a little bit of information, and we're just going to pass that raycast point, that raycast information through this method. And that's why we're using the Unity engine tag. So Raycast Hit, and we'll just call that hit point. And that is all we have to do for our interface. So let's go back to Unity, let that compile. We got that. All right, so before we move on, let's go ahead and create our aim point. So we'll come over here to our canvas. We'll go to Create UI, and we're just going to add an image. We'll call it aim point. And we're going to leave it centered in the middle of the screen, but we're going to change the width and height to 35. I think that works probably best. We'll click the little inspection icon over here, and we'll select the knob. You can either double click or just single click and then close out the box. And since our enemies are red, I think that the green probably works the best. So we'll do a nice little bright green so we can see it. Close that out. It isn't a raycast target, so we don't need to worry about anything touching it. We'll go ahead and deselect that. All right, so that is all of that. Next thing we need to do, we need to apply a health script to our enemies that will actually implement this interface. So we'll right click in our scripts folder, create C# script. For right now, we'll just call it enemy health. Let that process. And open that up as well. All right, so we don't need the system.collections or the collections.generic. We'll just go ahead and get rid of that. Just leave the using Unity engine. And we're going to create a couple of variables. So with these variables, we want them to have the protection of being a private variable because we don't want to accidentally change them from a different script. But we want to be able to see them in the inspector. So how do we do that? Well, open bracket, serialized field, close bracket. So that'll give you the visibility in inspector, but it still keeps it as a private field. We'll make a float for health. And we'll create another serialized field. And we'll create a game object for our particle system that is going to be our blood effect, right? And since it's a blood in the system, particle system, we'll just call it blood system, or I'm going to call it blood system. You can call whatever you want. All right, moving on from that. All right, so we're still prototyping here, so we don't need to increase with levels or anything like that, make it more difficult. So in the start method, we'll just initialize the health variable, and we'll give it a random amount between, we'll say 20 and 50. So health equals random.range. Start at 20F since it's a float, and take it up to 50F. Clean that up a little bit. All right, we're not using the update function, so we can actually just get rid of that entire function. All right, so now we've created this interface, and now we want to actually apply it. So we're going to go to, sorry about the click, I hit my ring. Right after mono behavior, we'll make a comma, and we'll add the interface. So iDamageable. You can see that it's showing that there's an error. If we hover over it, it'll tell us that we haven't implemented the method that we just created, right? So if we go back to the iDamageable interface, we've got this method damage taken, which requires two parameters. So we'll go back to enemy health, and we'll come right back down here, and we will say public void damage taken, and we'll apply those two variables. Float amount and Raycast Hit point, and that'll clear that. So if you don't want to go through and type all that, and you can't remember exactly, to say that your interface has multiple methods for that one interface, right? So let's go ahead and delete this real quick. We'll come back and get that error again. So if I just come over here and I right click on it, I can go to quick actions and refactoring, and it's going to tell me what I need to do, and I'm just going to go ahead and implement the interface, and it'll pop it right in there. I want this at the bottom below the start method, so I'll highlight everything that I want, and on a Mac I'm going to hold the Option key and just press the down arrow, move it down to where I want it at. And I can just delete this throw exception, and that's where I'm going to put my information at. All right, so for damage taken, the first thing we want to do is we want to subtract the health, or subtract the damage, right? So health minus equals amount. So the next thing we want to do, since we're actually going to be instantiating a game object that's going to be a blood particle system, or a blood effect, we will say instantiate. Oh, go ahead and type correctly. Instantiate. What are we doing? We're instantiating the blood system. And we're going to, the location is going to be the hit point, because we're going to use Raycast to do our shooting. So the hit point from the hit point dot point That'll be our transform. And finally, for our rotation, so we want the wound to appear like, if something's shooting out or if debris or something is coming off a building, we want it to come back off of the actual hit point, right? Not just be a set rotation where it could possibly shoot back the opposite way. So to do that, we're going to use quaternion.lookRotation. Well, what that takes is a vector transform, and to get that actual proper right angle that we want from where our hit point actually hit, we're going to give the hit point dot normal. It's going to look something like this. Quaternion dot look rotation, and then we're just going to pass it in the hit point dot normal. Finally, we're going to make the particle system that we're instantiating, in this case the blood for the enemies, we're going to make that a child of the actual enemy. And the reason that we're going to do that is because, say we're shooting some kind of people or some entity, and they're going through a death animation. Well, as they're falling back, if you want that blood splurt to follow the body and not just sit in some random space where you actually hit, you need to make it a child of that object. And since this is going to be actually attached to an enemy, we're just going to type in transform. That's all it takes is a transform. Last but definitely not least, we're going to make sure that we still have health so that enemy can keep charging at us, right? So if health is greater than or equal to 0, then, if health is less than or equal to 0, then we're going to take that game object and we're going to set its active state to false. And that is our enemy script. We'll go ahead and we'll save that. We'll come back over into Unity. Wait for that to compile. Highlight all of our enemies. We'll take the enemy health and just drag that onto that script. All right, so you can see here we've got visibility in our inspector for our two fields that we've set a serialized field. Health we'll just leave alone. That'll randomly generate at runtime. And then blood system, we're going to come over here into our prototypes. And I created a little particle system here that's just some green blocks, a little green blood. Play it. And if you want to copy what I've done, duration of 1.5, the major things that I changed: start life is a random between 1 and 2, start speed is random between 2.5 and 5, and I added a gravity modifier of 2 to make sure that it comes down so you get that downward spurt. Emission, I'm doing a burst of 50 of them. Shape, I left that at a cone, made sure that it was set to the base. And then finally down here on render, the very last thing, I selected a cube for the mesh. Just kind of a blocky little blush. All right, so let's go back, reselect all of our enemies. And in blood system, we'll take that blood splatter prefab and drag that over in there. Now I got that blood splatter prefab. All right, so now we actually need a way to shoot the enemy and actually cause the damage. So let's go back to our scripts folder and we will open up the input handler. So with this going on, and since we previously deleted the text element that we had for our rotation speed, we don't need the Unity Engine UI anymore, so we can just go ahead and highlight that and delete it. All right, so now we want to get ready to shoot. So we're going to do a raycast from the center of the camera directly forward, and then when we shoot that ray out, we're going to check and make sure that what we're shooting at is something that can be damageable. Well, how do we do that? We do it with a thing called layers. So the one thing that we're going to need right now, right off the top, is we're going to create a public layer mask, and we'll just call it damageable. And then we can set that in the inspector. So how are we going to shoot? Well, we're going to use the other things, the other two interfaces that we talked about last week, or last episode, and we're going to use I pointer down and I pointer up. So we'll come up right after I drag handler, comma, I pointer down handler, comma, I pointer up handler. And as you can see, there's certain methods that they want implemented. So we'll just right click, quick actions, apply the interface. And if you're on a Mac, I don't know what the shortcut is for a Windows, but if you're on a Mac, just put your cursor on where you need to implement, hold down the Option key and hit enter, and apply the interface. All right, so now we have these two methods, the public void on pointer down and the public void on pointer up. So what are we going to call? Well, we're going to create another method called shoot weapon. Takes no parameters currently. And we're going to shoot the raycast out from here. So initially we're just going to create a ray, call it ray, equals a new ray. We're going to start from the main camera, transform, transform, position, main camera, transform, forward. So you want to make sure you do main camera transform forward and not vector3 forward, because vector3 forward is always facing forward regardless of which way your camera is facing. Next thing we're going to do is the Raycast Hit, and we'll just call that hit. So now we get into actually shooting the raycast. So if physics.raycast, we're going to pass it the ray that we just created. We're going to retrieve or take out some information from the hit. For now, we'll just use a range of 500. And we want to, once the ray hits something, we want to see if it's on the layers that can be damageable, right? So we'll just select damageable. All right, so if all that passes, we shoot the ray out, and it goes out the distance that it can go, and it hits something that's within that range, or hit something that's on that layer. Then we want to take that information, hit .collider, and we want to get the game component, damageable. And from there, we're going to call the method damage taken. Now remember, it has two variables that it needs to be passed. So for now, we're just going to hard code a 10 in for damage, and then the hit, which we took out for the raycast hit. And that is all we need to do for there. So we'll save that. We'll go back to Unity. Let that finish compiling. So now here in Unity, there's a couple things we need to do. So first off, we're going to highlight all of our enemies, and we're going to come over here to layers. Now I've already created the enemy layer, but I'll walk through the steps of creating a layer if you don't have it. So you just come down here to add layer, and you can see from layer 6 all the way down to 31, you can create your own custom layers. I have a damageable for later on when I want to start damaging buildings, and then I have an enemy one here as well. So go back and re-highlight your enemies, go to layer, select the enemy drop down from there. All right, so from here, I'm only going to change this object. And the reason behind that is all my castles, since they're using a nav mesh agent to guide themselves around back to the camera, I put a little cube in the front of them so that I can tell which way that they're facing. And it's just my personal preference and to give me make it make sense in my head, basically. So since I have nothing on there that will register that it's actually part of the enemy on the cube, if I happen to shoot at that, I'm just going to change just this solo object because that's where all my code is at. Lastly, we need to go into the input handler. And so you can see now we have a new variable for damageable. Currently it's selected to nothing. We'll pull that drop down, and we could select enemy. And the great thing about doing it this way is that you can select multiple layers. So when I want to start damaging a building, I just select enemy and damageable at the same time. It shows mixed, and anything on those two layers will register as a hit. So we'll go back, we'll take damageable back off, and now we just have enemy. And if I hooked everything up right, cross your fingers, hopefully I did, this should run. And, oh, no, I just thought of something that I didn't do. Let's go back to Visual Studio. We created our method, but we didn't actually implement it, right? So on pointer down works whenever the mouse is clicked, or on a mobile device whenever your finger presses on the button or on the screen, and on pointer up, as you can think, whenever the mouse comes up or whenever you release. So when we touch down on the mobile device or we click with the computer, we want to actually run this shoot weapon. This isn't very efficient. It's not the best way to do it, but we're just prototyping right now. So we're just going to do an invoke repeating, and we're going to call shoot weapon. We're going to delay it by 0.5 seconds and then recall that every 0.5 seconds. So what this is going to do is the second that I touch my screen or click with my mouse, I'm going to wait half a second. It's going to start calling the shoot weapon script, and then every half second after that, it's going to call it again. So now to stop shooting, get rid of that throw exception. And when we lift our finger up, then we're just going to cancel invoke and let it know which cancel or which invoking we should be canceled. So shoot weapon. Save that. Go back to Unity, and it should work. All right, so Command P on Mac to run it. When I click down, push over the enemy, and you can see it displaying the blood splatter. Then as they get below health level, it goes back to 0, or they deactivate. All right, and we'll run it one more time, and I'll try and shoot them on the edge, and you can see how the blood splatter will shoot off to the side when they get a little bit closer. Shoot this guy. Yep, you can see instead of it shooting right at me, it's shooting off to the side. So everywhere it hits, it recognizes, and it does the 180 degrees off of that normal impact. All right, guys, I hope this was helpful. I hope you got something out of it. Let us know in the comments. Give us a like, give us a follow, give us a subscribe, depending on what you're watching this on. I'm going to post this on our YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We're on just about every social media, so come check us out. We put some fun stuff up sometimes. It's not just gaming videos. Appreciate it, guys, and peace.